Knowledge is power. Of all the tired proverbs put to parchment by the tepid fools who call themselves the learned philosophers of the world, this is the one that rings the truest throughout the ages. If the deepest and most primal fear of man is the fear of the unknown, then logically, it follows that to know no fear is to understand, to learn, to expand one's horizons. To deny the expansion of one's learning is to deny the evolution of the self. To stick to one path, to one tried and true method of living is, inherently, a sin. Knowledge is not inherently good or evil, and anyone who has ever claimed otherwise is, to be candid, a fool. Fools like those who try to maintain the order of things that we currently find our world stuck in, as if in perpetual stasis. But one cannot stop the march of progress. One cannot resist the changes that this world must endure, for change is the nature of the cosmos, a fact of life that many that live in this world fear, for man will always fear what he does not understand. I, too, once lived in fear of change. When I was but a mortal man, the idea of grasping at anything greater than the petty raids and feuds of the tribes was something that brought me a great anxiety, for I cared only for my creature comforts, and as one of the Norscan people, such comforts were rare things. Indeed, I was content to be a pawn in the games of Jarls, and such is the lot of many men and women in our world. Is it any wonder, then, why this world is a place of cowering weaklings, their hands clasped in prayers to gods who could not care less for their asinine beseeching, of half-literate pellars and witches fumbling around in darkness, trying to petition powers that they do not even comprehend, of scholars, doddering old men with wrists as thin as marsh rushes, their parchment stained with ink, fragile fingers barely able to hold a quill as they put record to things that are not worthy of a child's scribblings, let alone the vaunted halls of their academia, of demented elders held in places of honor, where their tired words and outdated machinations hold sway over the populace. The old world is a place of ignorance, a place of superstitious drivel, a place where even so-called learned men cannot accurately recall events from a harvest season ago, let alone keep records that do not contradict each other. The Empire of Man cares more for the preservation of its own crumbling power, a rotting edifice that is subverted from within, even without the aid of cultists and madmen. Petty nobles, those barons and counts and dukes and princelings, all vie for influence, and so they strike at one another constantly. Whether it be from the shadows with an assassin's blade, or on the field of battle with conscripted half-starving peasants put together in a so-called state army, mankind east of the Grey Mountains is doomed. Bretonia? Huh. To even say those hair-lipped, deformed excuses for men are capable of anything resembling learning and knowledge is an insult to those very concepts. A base-born horde of lackwits, huddling themselves around pitifully stoked fires within cottages that can barely withstand a stiff breeze, controlled in their entirety by a class of spoiled, horse-loving mongrels that even those pitiful excuses for rulers in the Empire put to shame. What they say is the blessed order of the Lady of the Lake, I call a glorified protection racket. The flower of Bretonia is painted to impress, but beneath that veneer is little of substance. Much like their vaunted knights, come to think. The dwarfs are no better about it. Their memories are long, this is true, and they keep record to immutable stone instead of flammable parchment. But stone can be shattered, and memories can be fogged. They care more for the remembrance of grievance and the striking of grudges than they do their own present. They look to the past in perpetuity, but they do not learn from it. Their wiser cousins, past the World's Edge Mountains, have embraced the truth of things, but even they are slaves to their past. Too hateful to learn, too spiteful to prosper. Excellent craftsmen, I suppose, so they have at least learned some things of worth. What of the elves? I shall not even bother to speak of the dark ones that live near the hellish border of the roof of the world at this point, nor will I address the arrogant, preening ancients on their precious island continent of Ulthuan. The Aesir and the Druchi do, however, share something in common with their forest cousins, the Azrai. They try to stand alone in a world that they once held in the palm of their hand, united under one glorious purpose, only to toss it all aside when the jealousy of a hero's son, the ignorance of a dwarven king, and the pomposity of an elected monarch, a laughable idea if I have ever heard one, led to a war so devastating that both the race of elves and the race of dwarfs careens towards inevitable extinction to this day. But I forget myself. The wood elves, as they are known by the ignorant, for all their ancient knowledge, their proud traditions, their self-styled god king and wood queen in so-called impenetrable woodland, are a fearful, spiteful people. They hide from the light of the world, content to hunt lowly beastmen from their perches, striking out in droves atop bucks in their wild hunts, bravely setting their finest warriors upon inbred peasants. The Azrai's pride is a poor shield to deflect the shame of abandonment, their indignance a rusted, pitted blade to swipe at any who would see them for what they truly are, their arrogance a tattered veil to hide the simple matter that their entire existence is at the tender mercies of tree sprites. They close themselves off from the world around them, content that they know all, that they have all, and that no one else can offer them anything, save for those Bretonnian children that are so generously donated by the Fey Enchantress. They are self-described isolationists, a very rough, strong synonym for coward. The old world is a place of fear, ignorance. It is a place deserving of contempt, its people deserving the torch and the pyre that they reserve for so-called radicals in the nations of men. And it is little better amongst the other races that call it home. But let it never be said that this servant of knowledge, in all its myriad forms, was unable to bring criticism to bear against his own place of birth. Norsca is, for all earthly and practical purposes, for those who live in the old world, the roof of the world. It is a frozen, mountainous place, filled equally with fjords of freezing water, ravines of razor-sharp ice, and fields of snow, spaced out with rocky, near-barren tundra, rivers that flow wide and rapid, going out into the Sea of Claws or the Sea of Chaos, narrow and hatefully bereft of anything of worth more inland. The mountains hide veins of gold, silver, and even platinum and obsidian that is precious to all races, save for the Ratmen, who are an entirely different topic for another chapter of my work. The dense forests of spruce and pine wood located along the southern border of my homeland are hardy, quick-growing for their kind, and there are rarer woods still further in. It is packed to the brim with winter white wolves, with teeth as long and sharp as daggers, their haunches packed with enough muscle that they could easily serve as draft animals, if not for their evil temperaments. Trolls make their lairs in whatever reeking hole in the earth best suits them, the scent of death, decay, and disease hanging heavy in the air, along with the stench of their owners, which is arguably worse. Gibbering hordes of mutants and chaos spawn travel in packs, ranging from the population of a hamlet to a teeming, writhing orgy of violence and madness that would threaten even the most well-garrisoned of cities. That is not even getting into the ice drakes, the rare chaos dragon that may fly down from the wastes to make its roost and to plot deaths uncounted, the rumored Fimir that squat in the cursed marshes of my homeland, the damnable Ymir, the fact that the winds of chaos blow south nigh constantly, that the land itself is suffused with warpstone. I shall, of course, elaborate upon this and more later within my grand work, but I think that my point is elaborated upon with enough candor. It is a harsh land, and so a harsh people have been raised to conquer it. Which, to my eternal disappointment, we have not. Though the Southrons may deign to consider all the men of the North to be one people, united in a singular goal, this could not be further from the truth. The countless clans that live within this frozen land are belligerent, bloodthirsty, violent, crude, and, perhaps most damning of all these qualities, ignorant in the extreme. Oh, the men of the North know to heed the gods, and are more than willing to set sail upon the long ships with their fellows, to explore and conquer foreign lands, to reave and to raid. But they do so not in pursuit of anything that might bring meaning to the North. It is for loot, for slaves, for food, for plunder. It is now, perhaps, that I explain why I pen this work, when I am of a people who I have spoken more harshly of than any I have mentioned before. I am ashamed to say that in my youth, I, too, partook in such things. In ages past, far enough that even my memory cannot recount it, for no memory is infallible, I was a young Vitki, learned in the ways of dark magic. By my hands, scores of men died in agony, reefed in dark fire, or their souls torn asunder for my amusement. I took what I wanted, who I wanted, when I wanted, and the band who I was a part of sailed along the coast of Nordland and Wasteland, taking what was offered or what we simply felt like. I cared not for knowledge. I cared only for the next day's plunder and pleasures. That changed the day that upon our return from the southern lands of the Empire, I was visited in my dreams by a demon. It is one thing to hear of these beings in the tales spun by our skalds, or by the herb-addled words of a seer or shaman. It is an entirely different thing to have one appear before you in your very mind. I remember it distinctly. It was a tall, slender being, skeletal in frame. In one of its many arms it held an apple before me, silvery in its coloration instead of red, green, or yellow. It told me that this, and this alone, would be the key to my greatness. No longer a Vitka, but a being that is spoken of in song and in legend. A black-clad warrior mage that could level legions with the gifts of chaos. All that would be required was that I was to devour this fruit, and ultimate power would soon be mine. How could any young Norscan refuse such an offer? The very next day, I set off towards the Chaos Wastes. I crossed the frozen sea, and there my quest began as I ventured north. My journey through that realm is uncomfortable to describe, even for a being like me. Even as I put quill to parchment, my mind reels at the thought of accounting all that had occurred. Landscapes that would shift and mold beneath your feet like wet clay. Air that would suddenly become charged with the sparks of lightning and peppered with decaying flesh that clung to your throat's insides, forcing you to vomit up blood and rot. Stepping through a city of darkness, where shadow shifted upon the walls in the shape of man, but not a living soul within. Change storms ravaged the lands I visited, and where sometimes I wandered through Arctic swampland, whose bog water did not freeze on the surface, but instead an inch below, I would, in the next instant, end up in verdant farmland where golden wheat swayed in a breeze that was tinted with the sighs of maidens. I do not know how long I wandered, for time has no meaning in the Chaos Wastes. But I do know that when it seemed my body would be ravaged down to its very fundaments, trapped in a desert where the grains were made of pounded ruby and where strands of silk would wrap around your limbs, cutting the flow of your blood when wound about you, I saw it. A silver apple, pristine and flawless. It jutted from the red grain shards, and I did not care for the fate of my body any longer. I took the apple, and I bit into it. I bit into it, and though it parted as easily as any other apple, my mouth was filled with a metallic sting of silver and iron. But I ate, and I ate, and I ate. When it was done, I suddenly knew what my purpose was. I knew that physical prowess enough to conquer any foe, the ability to reduce a man to ash with a flick of the wrist, the tongue of a seducer bringing forth a throng of slavish followers. None of it mattered in the face of knowledge. For to know all is to understand all. And to understand everything is to be able to conquer everything, including yourself. Maledictor, Doomweaver, Soul Flayer, Catalyst. And when I donned my chaos armor and took upon me the staff of fate, I became that which I am now, a sorcerer of the dark pantheon. And with my arcane might, I set out upon the wider world to take the knowledge I now hungered for more than a starving man hungers for a loaf of bread. The next few decades were dedicated, then, to study. I traveled the world in guises woven of shadow and deceit. I learned all that I could, wherever I could, of the old world and the new, of the primordial time before creation, of the time of the exodus of the old ones, the great incursion, the war of vengeance, Nehekara's rise and fall, Sigmar's reign, Gilles le Breton, the advent of Orion and Ariel. All this and more I have learned. So though I have judged them harshly, I know why the people of the old world revel in their flawed misery, fumbling in ignorance and looking to that which they do not know with fear. Familiarity breeds contempt, and I am very familiar with the people of this world. So though I judge them harshly, I shall do my very best to explain why they do so. With this tome, the Codex of All, I shall spread the fires of change, first to my brothers and sisters in Norsca, so that they may finally drag themselves from the dung of slavish devotion, uniting them under my banner, and then to the old world itself. The Empire's scholars will kneel and die in shame at my intellect. The serfs of Bretonnia will feel their fragile minds melt from their ears, their knights soon to know the measure of their worthless hides. The dwarfs will know that their grudges, their vengeance, is not before the march of progress. The Damaskron's pages torn asunder as they see all to be lies and deceit. Athaloran will burn, its people forced to see their own irrelevance and cowardice brought to the fore. And with their ignorance burned out of their very bodies, they shall be worthy vessels for the knowledge I share with them. They will thank me in time, for knowledge is power.